So this afternoon we have the Attorney General of the United States coming to the committee. There are a few questions that people are going to want to ask about. If it's not with regard to the Associated Press issue, maybe it's with regard to the FBI investigation of what happened at the IRS with regard to not just Tea Parties, but a lot of groups, it turns out, that they were asking a lot of inappropriate questions that are not necessary to determine a group's tax-exempt status. Or that it may be that they want to ask the Attorney General about the Boston Marathon matter, in which, let me say first, the FBI and state and local law enforcement did a really outstanding job in tracking down these terrorists and bringing them to justice very quickly after the matter occurred, and in a very cooperative manner. Unfortunately, there were some problems with information sharing beforehand that may have, we don't know, but may have helped to avoid it. And there were some issues afterwards in terms of the ability of the FBI to ask necessary questions of the surviving terrorists about potential other plots, conspirators, bombs, and so on. So all of that will be of interest to the members of the committee, and a whole array of other issues, including the profligate waste that's occurring in all sectors of the government as the administration attempts to vilify sequestration, a legitimate effort to cut 2.5% of the entire federal budget, or about 7 to 8% of the domestic and defense discretionary spending. At a time when the department has purchased a new prison at a cost of $170 million, while we have 4 prisons, new prisons, all standing empty, and at a time when they're having $12 cups of coffee and $10,000 pizza parties. So there'll be questions there about why it was necessary to put 2,200 deportable aliens, many of them were criminal aliens, some of them were serious criminals, out on the street in order to save money and put them out where they can, again, commit crimes against citizens of the United States. So all of those things are on the agenda. If you'd like to ask questions about any of them and many others, please don't hesitate. I know we're going to talk about immigration today, and I'm delighted to do that. I want to mention just a few other items that are on the agenda of the committee. Litigation reform. We will be addressing the Lawsuit Abuse Reduction Act and the FACT Act, which deals with litigation abuse involving bankruptcy and tort claims over asbestos-induced injury and illness. We will also be working, and we are working very hard on additional patent reform. As you know, we passed the most significant patent reform legislation in my lifetime last Congress, and that was great work done by my predecessor, Lamar Smith, who, by the way, in what many people would view as the most contentious committee in the Congress in terms of the issues that we deal with. We also have, for example, protecting the Second Amendment on our agenda. We also have life issues on the committee's agenda, also in the news these days. We also have constitutional amendments, criminal law, about which we have launched a new task force that will review the over-criminalization of federal law, looking at whether we need so many federal laws. We're adopting 500 new criminal laws a decade right now. We're up to 4,500 federal criminal laws, many of which do not require mens rea or intent to be convicted of a crime. So many businesses and individuals, we cite the example of the 11-year-old girl who saved a woodpecker from her cat. It was a little damaged, so she put it in a cage, and her mother got charged with violating the Migratory Bird Act. Wow. And they backed away from that one. That's good. We're not backing away from using it as an example of criminalization of federal law. There are now 25 or more federal government agencies and departments that have authority to arrest people, guys with badges and guns. We think that that is not what the public understands, that the limited law enforcement scope of the federal government, the traditional areas like the FBI, the DEA, and ATF are well beyond that, and that's subject to this review. And things like overpopulation of our prisons. The federal rate is still going up. The number of people incarcerated in many states are going the opposite direction because they have reviewed this area, and mandatory minimum sentencing also should be looked at to see how well that is working. So all these things are on the table for a bipartisan task force to examine. And with regard to patent reform, though, we also view this as another area where we need to do litigation reform. We also have on our agenda many regulatory reform issues, including the REINS Act, which will deal with allowing the Congress to have a look at regulations written by government agencies after the law has been passed, so that the Congress can say, yes, indeed, that's what we intended when we wrote that law. Instead of, you've gone way beyond it, we're going to put a halt to it until that is fixed. These are just a few of a multitude of items that we're all hard at work on, every subcommittee on the committee, and the great attorneys and other staff that are working on this are doing an outstanding job managing all those issues, and yet none of them even begins to compare to the amount of time and energy we're putting into the issue of immigration reform, which is definitely at the top of our agenda. We have a broken immigration system in the country, and we are hard at work trying to find solutions to fix it. We have a great new subcommittee chairman in Trey Gowdy from South Carolina. He has held a multitude of hearings at the subcommittee level. We've held some at the full committee level as well. We have embarked upon an effort to educate every member on the House side, and we believe the Democrats are doing the same on their side of the aisle, with regard to what constitutes immigration law. It's a very complex subject. There are 3 members in the House, all happen to be members of the Judiciary Committee, who practiced immigration law prior to coming to Congress. As Susan mentioned, I am one of those. I had an extensive business immigration practice with a good portion of work on family immigration law as well. And also Zoe Lofgren from California and Raul Labrador from Idaho practiced immigration law. But beyond that, for most members of Congress, this is a subject which is very confusing and it is very complex. It's not unlike the tax code in many respects in terms of its complexity. So we've been holding briefings, and now more than half of the House Republicans have participating in the briefings that we've been doing in conjunction with the Whip office and with the Policy Committee. And they are generating very lively, very helpful, and I'm sure very enlightening for, not just for the members, but for those of us working on the issue, in helping to determine a pathway forward to address this problem. You know, we are a nation of immigrants. There's not a person in this room who can't go back a few generations or several generations and find someone in their family who came to the United States to better their lives for themselves and their family. We are also a nation of laws. The rule of law is obviously one of the principles upon which the Judiciary Committee operates, but more importantly, it is a key principle to the success of our nation. So these two things are both important to address. And when I say we have a broken immigration system, we indeed have a broken immigration system. We have legal immigration laws in many areas that create tremendous opportunities to grow our economy and create jobs and really restore American vitality in some sectors, keep us in the forefront in other sectors, and put our economy on a path where we can see real economic growth and where we can deal with problems like the national debt. And people, the right people coming to the United States who offer those opportunities and who may graduate from American universities and then go somewhere else instead of staying here, that's a bad idea. Keeping them here working in U.S. companies or even starting their own companies with the opportunity to lawfully stay here after they come out of our great universities is something that we need to be addressing. We also have needs in other sectors of our economy. Agriculture is one that I'm particularly familiar with. I worked for years as chairman of the House Agriculture Committee on the agricultural guest worker program, and all the while not having jurisdiction over the issue because it was in the Judiciary Committee. But now we have a happy coincidence there that we're able to address that issue, and we are very much doing just that. So legal immigration reform and many other aspects of that is absolutely important to address, and it's not being addressed. We've been trying for years to get it addressed, so keep that in mind. Secondly, we are not seeing our current immigration laws enforced, and we need some new laws to assure that we do have proper respect for that rule of law, proper enforcement of the law. The Homeland Security Committee has primary jurisdiction over issues related to securing our border, and they are hard at work on that. In fact, they are marking up a bill dealing with that aspect of the immigration issue this week, and we are encouraging them to move ahead in that regard. We also believe that it's very important to address this issue with regard to the interior of the country as well, because first of all, 35 to 40% of the people who are not lawfully present in the United States entered the country legally on student visas, visitors visas, business visas, visa waivers, and all of those people entered the country legally. So securing the border really does not affect that aspect of illegal immigration, and therefore we need to have a system where we are reducing the magnets that draw people here, and we are engaging more people than what the federal government can put on the ground to make sure that our immigration laws are enforced. So we will be coming forward here within the next week or so with a companion piece of legislation that will supplement, complement what they're doing in Homeland Security, but focus on the interior of the country. You may have noted that the 5,000 member ICE organization that deals with the interior of the country as opposed to the border security issues has sued the Obama administration for prohibiting them for doing their job. And we expect that we'll see some interesting decisions coming out of the case in Texas where that lawsuit rests. But 5,000 people in a nation of more than 3 million square miles and 300 million people is not enough to address this issue in terms of having the kind of help on the ground that's needed in really every community in America. So I believe that we should resolve these disputes that the federal government, particularly the Obama administration, has been having with Arizona and Alabama and other states, and give clear statutory authority to the states to be involved in the process of enforcing our immigration laws. Not to have separate immigration policies, not to have separate immigration laws, but if they choose to participate, to be clearly allowed to participate, and not in the sort of situation here where in Arizona they set out to do some things, the Supreme Court said, well, you can't do these things, you can do these things, things that they can't do, some of them they could do with the proper passage of legislation, and some that they could do, the current administration took their football and went home when they lost part of that case and said, well, we're not going to allow you to participate in our program that we exercise in a spotty and intermittent fashion around the country. We need to change that and make that very clear. Why do we need to change it? Because we need to assure the American people that we're not going to, in this effort at immigration reform, and this is a very serious effort and we need to address all of it, but we're going to not repeat the mistakes that we made in 1986. This is absolutely critical. In 1986, we gave an easy pathway to citizenship to close to 3 million people with the promise that we would have new employer sanctions, that we would have new border security provisions, and that we would enforce the law, and therefore illegal immigration was on its way out the door with the passage of that legislation. But of course, the opposite occurred. We passed bad laws with regard to legal immigration reform, laws that were unworkable in sectors of the economy like agriculture. Today, probably 90% of farmers do not use the H-2A legal guest worker program because for a variety of reasons it is truly unworkable. So what we need to have is a workable legal system there, but we also need to have clear enforcement of the law. So that leads us to the third key issue here, and that is what about the status of millions of people. No one knows exactly how many. The most commonly used number is 10 to 11 million, but in any event, there are far more people unlawfully present in the United States today than there were in 1986. So clearly that did not work, and clearly we now need to address the situation. So if we get the legal immigration reform right, and it's important to do that if you give a legal status to people who are not lawfully here, because in 1986 about 1/3 of our agricultural workforce left the farms and got jobs elsewhere, jobs that aren't as tough, jobs that aren't as backbreaking as a lot of agricultural work is. So we need to have an opportunity for people who want to come here on a temporary basis, but on a workable basis for all of agriculture, to be able to do that. And so when we have a legal status, if we can get to that, and people leave as they will, and I don't believe we can have any kind of legal status that would tie somebody to a particular area of work. They're going to be able to work wherever they want to. They're going to be able to travel in and outside the country. They're going to be able to, if required, to pay taxes. They're going to be able to, I would perceive, start their own businesses. And there are lots of a great opportunity with a legal status, but we have to anticipate what happens with the need for legal immigration reform. And we've got to have enforcement moving forward. And that leads us to the problem with the Senate bill, which is that first of all, we very much commend the so-called Gang of Eight in the Senate and the Senate itself for addressing this issue. It needs to be addressed. But we do have concerns that they are going to provide a legal status to millions of people and then fix these problems with regard to E-Verify, which many of you are familiar with. We have in both the House and Senate good E-Verify legislation. The House is a little different than the Senate, but it is nonetheless something that is workable for the enforcement of our laws and is workable from the standpoint of business. And those who voluntarily use it, more than 500,000 companies in the United States voluntarily use it today. Its accuracy rate is now to 99.7%, and it is very, very important to have that. But if we're going to have a mandatory E-Verify in place, we need to put it in place immediately with a lead-in time based on the size of the business. But our bill in the House provides that it'll be completely in place within 2 years. Secondly, we need to have an entry-exit system, which has been mandated by the law for about 17 years now and still not in place. I know some of the companies represented here could easily and quickly figure out how to do that if the government were really serious about doing it. But it's a very, very important aspect, not just to knowing who's not lawfully in the United States, but also the key to solving the desires of many countries to be part of the visa waiver program. Right now we base a country's eligibility for that on the refusal rate at the U.S. consular offices when they apply for a visa overseas. Well, different consular offices can impose different standards, and therefore it's somewhat arbitrary. But if you knew what the percentage of people who are admitted to the country had actually left the country because you had a workable electronic system to say they came in, they left, you'd know what the real percentage of overstays in the country was and be able to better judge which countries should be given the visa waiver program. The border security issues are also important in that regard, and this interior enforcement and local law enforcement are better served in that regard. So if those things were put in tandem with the granting of legal status, rather than afterwards. People might be more willing to trust that they would get what they didn't get after the 1986 law, and that is real, meaningful enforcement, and not enforcement that one person, namely the President of the United States, and not just this President of the United States, but others as well, can basically flip a switch and say, well, you know what, we're just not going to enforce this whole area of immigration law. We can't have that repeat of 1986. In the House, we are determined not to make the mistakes that were made in the Senate in 2007, when an immigration law was brought forward in cooperation between a Republican president and a Democratic Senate, and basically imposed from the top down, without the necessary groundwork to educate not just the members of Congress, but the public about the issue, and to make sure that it goes through regular order, which that did not do in the Senate. The Senate is paying more attention to that. We're paying a lot of attention to that, and we are working through this methodically with a series of bills. We're now up to 3, counting the Homeland Security bill, 2 more that we'll introduce this week, one dealing with high-skilled workers, both immigrant and non-immigrant high-skilled workers, and investors and people who and others want to invest in, but want to participate in a startup. And it's better, in my opinion, that that startup be here in the United States, in Boston or Austin or Silicon Valley or Northern Virginia or anywhere else in my district in Southwest Virginia. We have lots of internet-related startup businesses. We want to encourage that with a piece of legislation that would work in that regard.